Hi, I'm Zoe, 32 years old, and I thought I had finally found my place in this world when I married into the Patterson family 2 years ago. Growing up bouncing between foster homes, I always dreamed of having real family dinners. You know, the kind where everyone gathers around a big table sharing stories and laughter. When Marcus first invited me to his family's Sunday dinners, I felt like I was living in a movie. His mother Dorothy would set this beautiful table with fine china and crystal glasses, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. But lately something had been feeling off during these gatherings, like there was an undercurrent I couldn't quite put my finger on. Tonight was supposed to be special, our second wedding anniversary, and Dorothy had insisted on hosting a celebration dinner that she promised would be unforgettable. Before I share what happened that night, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more real-life stories like mine. Trust me, you'll want to stay for this one, because what unfolded at that dinner table changed everything I thought I knew about family respect and standing up for yourself. Let me paint you the full picture of how I got here, because understanding my background makes what happened that night even more significant. I grew up in the foster care system from age 7 after my parents died in a car accident. I bounced between 6 different homes over 11 years, never staying anywhere long enough to feel truly settled or loved. Each placement came with its own challenges, and by the time I aged out at 18, I had learned to be incredibly self-reliant and grateful for any kindness shown to me, no matter how small. I put myself through community college, working multiple jobs, eventually landing a management position at a popular coffee shop chain in downtown Portland. That's where I met Marcus Patterson 3 years ago on a rainy Tuesday morning. He was different from the usual business crowd that rushed through for their caffeine fix. He actually took time to chat, asked about my day, and left generous tips not just for me but for all the staff. He had this warm smile and genuine interest in people that drew me in immediately. Marcus seemed like everything I had ever dreamed of in a partner. He was kind, attentive, successful in his marketing career, and most importantly to me, he came from what appeared to be a close-knit family. When he talked about his childhood, his voice would light up describing family vacations, holiday traditions, and Sunday dinners that had been happening for decades. After growing up without any of that stability, the idea of joining an established family felt like winning the lottery. Our first year of dating was magical. Marcus would pick me up after work, take me to nice restaurants, and introduce me to experiences I had never had. He seemed proud to have me on his arm, always telling me how beautiful I looked and how lucky he felt. When he brought up meeting his family 6 months into our relationship, I was nervous but excited. Dorothy Patterson was nothing like I had imagined. While Marcus had described her as warm and welcoming, my first impression was of an elegant woman in her early 60s who carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money or status. She lived in a beautiful colonial-style mansion in the hills, complete with manicured gardens and a circular driveway that screamed old money. When Marcus introduced us, she looked me up and down with eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of my appearance, from my discount store dress to my practical shoes. The first few family dinners were polite but cold. Dorothy would greet everyone with warm hugs and animated conversations, asking about their work, their friends, their lives. When it came to me, she would offer a brief smile and ask generic questions like how I was enjoying the weather. I told myself she was just being cautious, that it would take time for her to warm up to the woman dating her son. But as months passed, I started noticing specific incidents that seemed minor individually but formed a pattern when I looked back. During family photos, Dorothy would somehow always position herself in a way that blocked me from being in the center shots. At dinner, she would seat me at the far end of the table, away from the main conversations. She would make comments about my background, asking questions about foster care, in a tone that felt more like research than genuine interest. The comments about my modest upbringing started subtly. She would mention how fortunate Marcus was to have grown up with such stability, how important proper breeding was in marriage, how family traditions needed to be preserved. When I would try to contribute stories from my own life, the conversation would somehow shift before I could finish speaking. Marcus, bless his heart, seemed oblivious to these dynamics. Whenever I tried to bring up feeling excluded or uncomfortable, he would make excuses. "Mom's just protective of her sons," he would say, or "she needs time to warm up to new people," or my personal favorite, "You're being too sensitive, honey. She's from a different generation." The situation escalated significantly after Marcus and I got married in a small ceremony 2 years ago. Dorothy had pushed for a large wedding at the country club, but we chose something intimate and affordable instead. I could tell she was disappointed that we didn't follow her vision, and her attitude toward me became even more strained after that. She started hosting weekly family dinners always on Sundays, and attendance was essentially mandatory according to the unspoken family rules. These weren't casual get-togethers. Dorothy would spend days preparing elaborate menus, setting formal table settings, and creating what felt more like dinner theater than family time. The pressure to attend was immense because skipping meant disappointing not just Dorothy but Marcus, who valued these traditions deeply. During these weekly gatherings, the subtle slights became more obvious. She would serve everyone else first, sometimes forgetting to prepare enough food for me. She would discuss family plans and events, asking everyone's availability except mine, then acting surprised when Marcus would mention I might want to join. She had a way of making me feel like a guest who had overstayed their welcome rather than a family member. Tonight was supposed to be different. It was our second wedding anniversary, and when Dorothy offered to host a celebration dinner, Marcus was thrilled. He saw it as a sign that his mother was finally accepting me into the family. I wanted to believe that too, despite the growing pit in my stomach every time I thought about spending another evening in that house. Dorothy had called Marcus earlier in the week, her voice sweet as honey, saying she wanted to do something special to celebrate our marriage and how happy we made each other. She insisted on handling all the planning, telling us to just show up and be ready for a wonderful evening with family. Marcus was over the moon, interpreting this gesture as the breakthrough we had been waiting for in his mother's relationship with me. The Patterson family mansion looked even more imposing than usual as we pulled up the circular driveway that evening. Dorothy had outdone herself with the presentation. Every window glowed with warm light. The front entrance was decorated with fresh flowers, and you could smell something incredible cooking even from the car. Marcus squeezed my hand as we walked to the front door, his excitement palpable. "See? I told you she just needed time," he whispered to me as we rang the doorbell. "This is going to be the turning point, Zoe. I can feel it." Dorothy opened the door wearing a stunning navy blue dress that probably cost more than I made in 2 months. Her silver hair perfectly styled and her smile so bright it could have powered the house. The warmth in her greeting, however, was distinctly uneven in its distribution. "Marcus, darling," she exclaimed, pulling him into a long embrace and kissing both his cheeks. "My handsome son, I'm so glad you're here." She turned to his brother James and sister-in-law Patricia, who had arrived just behind us, repeating the same enthusiastic welcome. When she finally acknowledged me, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Zoe," she said with a brief nod, and an even briefer smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for coming." The difference in greeting was so stark that even Patricia raised her eyebrows slightly, but Marcus was already inside, admiring the decorations and complimenting his mother on how beautiful everything looked. The guest list for our anniversary dinner included Marcus's brother James with his wife Patricia, his sister Caroline with her husband Robert, and Dorothy's sister Aunt Margaret, who had driven in from Seattle specifically for the occasion. Everyone was dressed to the nines in cocktail attire and expensive jewelry. I was wearing my nicest dress, a simple black number I had bought for our wedding, but I suddenly felt underdressed and out of place. What made it worse was that when Marcus had asked about the dress code, Dorothy had specifically told him to let me know it would be casual family dining. Looking around at everyone else's formal attire, it became clear that message had only been delivered to me. Whether this was Marcus's oversight or Dorothy's intentional misdirection, I found myself standing in their elegant foyer, feeling like I had shown up to a black tie event in jeans. The pre-dinner gathering took place in their spacious living room, which was decorated like something out of a design magazine. Crystal chandeliers cast perfect lighting over antique furniture and family portraits that chronicled generations of Patterson's success. Dorothy played the perfect hostess, gliding around the room with a silver tray of what looked like expensive wine and artisanal cheese selections. She served everyone individually, taking time to ask about their preferences and making small talk about the wine's origin or the cheese's aging process. James got a full pour of what appeared to be a vintage red wine, with Dorothy explaining its significance and asking if he could detect the oak notes. Patricia received the same treatment, followed by Caroline, Robert, and Aunt Margaret. When Dorothy finally made her way to me, she paused for a moment, looking at me as if she was trying to remember who I was. Then she reached for a different glass from her tray, one that was clearly distinct from the wine glasses everyone else had received. "Here you go, dear," she said sweetly, handing me a glass of what was unmistakably tap water, with a few ice cubes floating in it. "I thought you might prefer something simple." I stared at the glass, then looked around the room at everyone else swirling their wine and discussing its merits. The contrast was impossible to ignore, and I felt heat rising in my cheeks. "Actually, I would love to try the wine," I said politely, hoping this was just an oversight. "It sounds wonderful." Dorothy's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Oh dear, I thought you didn't drink fine wine," she replied in that same sweet tone. "I wouldn't want to waste it on someone who might not appreciate its complexity." This was particularly insulting because Dorothy knew perfectly well that I enjoyed wine. Marcus and I had brought bottles to previous family dinners, and I had participated in wine tasting conversations before. Her comment was designed to make me feel unsophisticated and unwelcome, and it was working. Marcus was across the room, deep in conversation with his brother about some work project, completely oblivious to what had just transpired. The other family members had witnessed the exchange, but seemed to find their wine glasses suddenly very interesting to examine. The pre-dinner conversation centered around topics that felt deliberately exclusive. Dorothy steered discussions toward country club events. I had never attended yacht trips I had never been invited on, and private school memories from institutions I could never have afforded. When someone would mention a restaurant, it was always somewhere prohibitively expensive. When they discussed travel, it was to destinations that required the kind of disposable income I couldn't even imagine. I tried several times to contribute to conversations, sharing experiences from my own life or asking questions about their stories. But each attempt was met with polite but brief responses before the conversation pivoted back to topics I couldn't engage with. It felt like being at a party where everyone was speaking a language I didn't understand. Marcus kept getting pulled deeper into family conversations, physically moving away from me as different relatives wanted to catch up with him. I found myself standing alone near the fireplace, sipping my water, while everyone else enjoyed their wine and cheese, feeling increasingly invisible and unwelcome. After about 45 minutes of this social torture, Dorothy clapped her hands together and announced with great fanfare that dinner was ready. She had been preparing all day, she explained, and had created a very special menu to celebrate Marcus and my anniversary. The way she said special made my stomach clench with apprehension, but Marcus beamed with pride at his mother's efforts. As we moved toward the dining room, I caught a glimpse of the table through the doorway and gasped. Dorothy had set a table that looked like it belonged in a luxury restaurant. Fine china crystal glasses, silver flatware, and elaborate centerpieces created an atmosphere of elegant sophistication. This was clearly going to be a memorable meal, though I was beginning to suspect not in the way Marcus anticipated. The dining room was a masterpiece of formal presentation that took my breath away, and not in a good way. Dorothy had transformed her already impressive space into something that belonged in a five-star restaurant. The mahogany table gleamed under the light of an ornate chandelier, set with what I recognized as her finest china delicate plates with gold trim that she usually reserved for major holidays. Each place setting included multiple pieces of sterling silver flatware arranged in perfect formation, crystal wine glasses that caught the light like diamonds, and cloth napkins folded into elaborate shapes. The seating arrangement, of course, followed Dorothy's usual pattern with mathematical precision. Marcus was seated to her right in the place of honor with the rest of the family arranged around the table, in order of what I had learned was their perceived importance in Dorothy's hierarchy. I found my assigned seat at the very end of the table, physically separated from Marcus by 6 other people and psychologically isolated from the main flow of conversation. Dorothy disappeared into the kitchen and returned with the kind of presentation that would make professional chefs jealous. She was carrying individual plates on a silver serving tray, each one arranged like a work of art. The smell that wafted from the kitchen was incredible, rich and savory, with hints of garlic and herbs that made my mouth water despite my growing anxiety. She began serving with the ceremony of a high-end restaurant, starting with Marcus and working her way around the table. Each plate she set down contained a perfectly cooked filet mignon, probably 8 ounces of prime beef seared to perfection with what looked like a red wine reduction drizzled artistically around the plate. The steak was accompanied by roasted asparagus, arranged in a precise bundle truffle mashed potatoes, piped into an elegant swirl, and what appeared to be sautéed mushrooms that looked like they cost more per pound than I spent on groceries in a week. James received his plate with appreciation and compliments about the presentation. Patricia's arrival was met with Dorothy explaining the cut of meat and how she had prepared the reduction sauce. Caroline got a detailed description of the truffle oil used in the potatoes, and Robert was told about the special seasoning blend Dorothy had created for the asparagus. Each family member's plate was presented with pride and care, Dorothy taking time to explain elements of the preparation and accepting compliments on her culinary skills. The steaks looked restaurant quality, cooked to what appeared to be each person's preferred level of doneness, and the sides were arranged with the kind of attention to detail that spoke of hours of preparation. As Dorothy worked her way around the table, I watched with growing anticipation and dread. The logical part of my brain kept insisting that surely she would present me with a similar plate, that this elaborate preparation had included a portion for me as well. But the part of my brain that had been cataloging months of subtle slights was preparing for something else entirely. When Dorothy finally reached my end of the table, she paused for a moment, and I could swear I saw something that looked almost like satisfaction flicker across her face. Then she reached under her serving tray and pulled out something that made my heart sink into my stomach. She placed in front of me a plain peanut butter sandwich on what was unmistakably a paper plate, the kind you buy for children's birthday parties. The sandwich looked like it had been made with the cheapest white bread money could buy, slathered with what appeared to be generic peanut butter cut diagonally with all the care you might give to packing a school lunch. Next to the sandwich, she placed a plastic fork, the flimsy kind that bends when you try to cut anything substantial. The silence that followed was deafening. Every conversation stopped as family members processed what they were seeing. The contrast between my paper plate and everyone else's elegant china presentation was so stark it felt like a physical slap. I stared at the sandwich, unable to process what was happening, while Dorothy smiled down at me with saccharine sweetness. "I know how much you appreciate simple food, dear," she said in a tone that dripped with false concern and barely concealed condescension. "I didn't want to overwhelm you with anything too fancy or complicated. This seemed much more your style." I looked up the table toward Marcus, desperate for some sign that he was seeing what I was seeing, that he understood the magnitude of what his mother had just done. He was staring at his own perfectly prepared steak, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth, his face flushed with what I hoped was anger but suspected might be embarrassment. Not at his mother's behavior, but at my presence in this moment. The other family members were engaged in a careful dance of averted eyes and sudden interest in their wine glasses. A few exchanged glances that I caught in my peripheral vision, and I swear I saw Patricia's lips twitch in what might have been a suppressed smile. James cleared his throat and made a comment about how delicious everything looked, deliberately not specifying whose plate he was referring to. Dorothy continued her serving routine as if nothing unusual had happened. She returned to the kitchen and brought out the side dishes for everyone else, placing serving bowls of roasted vegetables around the table, along with a basket of what looked like homemade dinner rolls and a selection of gourmet condiments and sauces. When she reached me again, she placed next to my sandwich a small bag of generic potato chips, the kind you might find in a gas station vending machine, and a single packet of ketchup that looked like it had been saved from a fast food order. "There you go, sweetie," she said with that same false warmth. "I'm sure this will be much more comfortable for you than trying to navigate all these complicated flavors and textures." The humiliation was so complete and deliberate that I felt physically sick. This wasn't oversight or poor planning, or even casual rudeness. This was a carefully orchestrated demonstration designed to put me in what Dorothy considered my proper place. She had spent hours preparing an elaborate anniversary dinner for her family, and she had specifically planned my exclusion from it in the most visible and humiliating way possible. As the family began eating their gourmet meal, making appreciative sounds about the quality and flavor of their food, I sat staring at my peanut butter sandwich, unable to take a bite. The smell of their perfectly prepared steaks filled the air, while I contemplated whether eating this deliberate insult would be worse than sitting there with untouched food, both options feeling like defeats. The next 30 minutes felt like the longest of my entire life. I sat at the end of that beautiful table, my peanut butter sandwich growing stale on its paper plate, watching the Patterson family enjoy what was clearly a meticulously planned gourmet meal while acting as if my exclusion was the most natural thing in the world. The conversation flowed around me like I was a piece of furniture, with family members discussing the incredible flavors of their food, complimenting Dorothy on her culinary skills, and sharing stories that seemed deliberately chosen to highlight experiences and privileges I had never had access to. Every bite they took of their perfectly prepared steaks felt like another small cut to my dignity. Dorothy was in her element, basking in the praise for her cooking, while periodically glancing down the table at me with what I can only describe as satisfaction. She had created exactly the dynamic she wanted, with everyone focused on her generosity and skill, while I sat isolated with my paper plate and plastic fork, a visible reminder of who belonged at this table and who didn't. "Marcus, darling," she said, cutting into her perfectly pink filet mignon, "do you remember when you were 12 and I made this same dish for your birthday? You said it was better than any restaurant, and I've been perfecting the recipe ever since." Marcus smiled and nodded, taking another bite. "It's incredible, Mom. You've outdone yourself tonight." The praise seemed to energize Dorothy, and she launched into detailed stories about Marcus's childhood, each one carefully chosen to illustrate how he deserved the finest things in life. She talked about private tennis lessons, summer camps in Switzerland, and college preparation tutors, painting a picture of a life where excellence and luxury were simply expected standards. "A person's upbringing really shapes their expectations, don't you think?" she said, her eyes briefly meeting mine before turning back to Marcus. "When you're raised with quality, you learn to appreciate the finer things. It becomes part of who you are." Aunt Margaret, who had been suspiciously quiet during the serving incident, decided to join the conversation with her own pointed observations. "Absolutely, Dorothy. Breeding and background are so important in a marriage. You want someone who understands your family's values and traditions." James chimed in with memories of family vacations I had never been invited to join, describing ski trips to Aspen and beach houses in Martha's Vineyard, with the kind of casual familiarity that made it clear these weren't special occasions, but regular family experiences. Each story was another reminder of the world Marcus came from and how foreign it was to someone like me. Patricia, who I had always thought was the most reasonable of Marcus's relatives, surprised me by contributing her own thoughts about the importance of appropriate matches. "It's not about being snobby," she said delicately, cutting her asparagus. "It's about compatibility. People from similar backgrounds just understand each other better." Throughout this entire conversation, Marcus was nodding along and even laughing at some of the more pointed comments. The man I had married, who had promised to love and protect me, was sitting there enjoying his gourmet meal while his family systematically dismantled my dignity and belonging. Every nod, every laugh, every engaged response felt like a betrayal. I kept waiting for him to notice what was happening, to say something about the obvious disparity in how we were being treated, to defend his wife in some small way. Instead, he seemed to be enjoying the evening exactly as his mother had planned it, basking in the familiar warmth of family approval, while remaining oblivious to the cost of that warmth. When Dorothy announced it was time to clear the dinner plates and bring out dessert, my stomach dropped even further. I had been hoping this humiliation was over, that perhaps she would treat me normally for the rest of the evening, but her expression as she collected the plates told me the worst was yet to come. She made a grand production of clearing everyone's plates, complimenting them on finishing their meals, and asking if anyone needed anything before dessert. When she reached me, she looked at my untouched sandwich with false concern. "Oh dear, you didn't eat anything," she said loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Was something wrong with it? I tried to make it exactly the way I thought you'd like it." The implication was clear: if I complained about the sandwich, I would be ungrateful. If I claimed nothing was wrong, I was admitting that I simply didn't appreciate what she had provided. It was a perfect trap designed to make me look bad regardless of how I responded. "I'm just not very hungry," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Well, hopefully you'll have room for dessert," she said with a smile that made my skin crawl. "I've prepared something very special for our anniversary celebration." She disappeared into the kitchen while the family continued their conversation, now discussing upcoming social events and charity galas that I knew nothing about. The exclusion was so complete that I might as well have been invisible, except for the occasional glance that reminded me that my presence was being noted and catalogued. When Dorothy returned carrying a silver tray of what looked like individual chocolate soufflés, each one perfectly risen and dusted with powdered sugar, my heart sank completely. These weren't just any desserts. They were clearly professional quality creations that had taken significant skill and time to prepare. She began her serving ritual again, placing each soufflé in front of family members with descriptions of the Belgian chocolate she had used, the technique required to achieve the perfect texture, and suggestions for how to enjoy them at the optimal temperature. Each dessert was accompanied by fresh berries and what looked like homemade whipped cream, presented on delicate dessert plates with gold-rimmed edges. By the time she reached me, I was holding my breath, praying that somehow this would be the moment she showed mercy, that she would include me in this final course and end the evening with some shred of dignity intact. Instead, she placed in front of me a single store-bought cookie still in its plastic wrapper, the kind you might grab at a checkout counter as an impulse purchase. It was generic brand, probably cost less than 50 cents, and sat on my paper plate like the punchline to a cruel joke. This was my breaking point. The sandwich had been humiliating, but this felt like complete annihilation of any pretense that I belonged in this family or deserved basic respect as Marcus's wife. The contrast between the elaborate chocolate soufflés everyone else was enjoying and my wrapped cookie was so absurd it felt surreal. I looked up the table at Marcus one more time, hoping desperately that this final insult would snap him out of whatever trance he was in and make him realize what his mother was doing to his wife. He was taking his first bite of soufflé, closing his eyes in appreciation of the rich chocolate, completely absorbed in the dessert and the family conversation continuing around him. "Marcus," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the dinner conversation. He looked up, chocolate still on his lips, his expression mildly annoyed at being interrupted. "What's wrong now, Zoe?" The dismissive tone in his voice, the implication that I was the problem in this scenario, was the last straw. I realized in that moment that he wasn't oblivious to what was happening. He was choosing to ignore it, choosing his family's approval over his wife's dignity, choosing the comfortable familiarity of belonging over the uncomfortable reality of standing up for what was right. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that cut through the dinner conversation like a knife. Every head turned toward me, and for the first time all evening, I had the complete attention of everyone at that table. The chocolate soufflé sat half-eaten, while the Patterson family waited to see what the woman with the wrapped cookie was going to do next. "Dorothy," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor I felt inside, "I need to thank you for this evening." Confusion flickered across several faces. This wasn't the reaction they had expected. Dorothy's eyebrows raised slightly, but her smile remained fixed in place, clearly anticipating some kind of grateful submission that would confirm her success. "You've shown me exactly who you are," I continued, looking directly into her eyes. And more importantly, you've shown me exactly who my husband is. Now the confusion was turning to alarm. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, finally sensing that something significant was happening, though I could tell he still didn't fully grasp the magnitude of what his mother had done or what I was about to do about it. I turned to address each family member individually, my voice growing stronger with each word. James, you sat here and watched your mother serve me a gas station cookie while everyone else got homemade soufflés, and you said nothing. Patricia, you actually smiled when you saw my paper plate. Caroline, you participated in conversations designed specifically to make me feel excluded and unwelcome. Each person I addressed looked down at their dessert, unable to meet my eyes. Robert mumbled something about not wanting to interfere in family dynamics. Aunt Margaret suddenly became very interested in the pattern on her napkin. But I wasn't done. The months of accumulated slights, the years of making excuses for Marcus's family, the evening of systematic humiliation had all led to this moment, and I was going to use it. You all sat here and watched a deliberate, calculated effort to humiliate me, and every single one of you chose to be complicit in it rather than show even basic human decency to someone who has never done anything but try to love and respect this family. I turned to Marcus, who was finally beginning to look uncomfortable, though I suspected it was more about the scene I was creating than genuine understanding of what had transpired. And you, Marcus, my husband, the man who promised to love and protect me. You watched your mother serve me a peanut butter sandwich while everyone else got filet mignon, and you said nothing. You participated in conversations designed to exclude me, and you enjoyed every minute of it. Marcus finally found his voice, but his response revealed everything I needed to know about where his loyalties truly lay. Zoe, you're overreacting. It's just dinner. Mom went to a lot of trouble to make this special, and you're embarrassing yourself. The word embarrassing hung in the air like a slap. After everything that had happened, after the deliberate and systematic humiliation I had endured, he was worried about me embarrassing myself. I'm embarrassing myself, I asked, my voice rising slightly. Marcus, look at this table. Look at what's in front of me compared to what everyone else has. Your mother spent hours planning this evening specifically to humiliate me in front of your entire family, and you think I'm the embarrassment. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, holding it up so everyone could see. I want to document this moment, I said, taking pictures of the table setting, making sure to capture the stark contrast between my paper plate with its wrapped cookie and the elegant place setting surrounding it. I want to remember exactly how this family treats people they consider beneath them, because I'm going to need these pictures when I explain to people why I left. The word left seemed to electrify the room. Dorothy finally spoke up, her sweet facade cracking for the first time all evening. Now, dear, you're being very dramatic about a simple family dinner. Perhaps you're not used to formal dining, but there's no need to create such a scene. Her attempt to minimize what had happened and blame my reaction on my background was exactly the wrong thing to say. It confirmed that every suspicion I'd had about her motivations was correct. A simple family dinner, I repeated, looking around the table. Dorothy, you spent days planning this meal. You carefully prepared individual filet mignons for 7 people and a peanut butter sandwich for 1. You served homemade chocolate soufflés to your family and a convenience store cookie to your son's wife. Nothing about tonight was simple or accidental. Marcus tried again to minimize the situation. Mom's just old-fashioned Zoe. She doesn't mean anything by it. You're being too sensitive about this whole thing. The phrase too sensitive was like gasoline on a fire that had been building for 2 years. Every excuse, every dismissal, every time he had chosen his family's comfort over my dignity came flooding back. Too sensitive, I said, my voice now carrying the full weight of my anger and hurt. Marcus, if someone treated your mother the way she just treated me, you would be outraged. If someone served her a sandwich while giving everyone else steak, you would never speak to them again. But because it's happening to me, I'm supposed to smile and be grateful and not make waves. I looked around the table one more time, taking in the faces of people who had just demonstrated exactly how little they valued me as a human being. I've spent 2 years making excuses for all of you trying to fit into a family that never wanted me, hoping that kindness and patience would eventually earn me some basic respect. Dorothy's mask was slipping further. Respect is earned dear. It's not simply given because you married into a family. There it was. The truth she had been dancing around for 2 years finally stated plainly. In Dorothy's world, I hadn't earned the right to basic human dignity because I came from the wrong background, had the wrong pedigree, didn't meet her standards for what her son deserved. You're absolutely right, Dorothy, I said, surprising everyone, including myself, with my calm agreement. Respect is earned. And tonight, you've earned my complete understanding of who you really are. I walked around the table slowly, no longer the excluded outsider sitting at the far end, but a woman who had finally found her voice and was going to use it. The family members who had been so confident and comfortable just moments before now seemed to shrink in their chairs as I approached each of them. You know what's interesting about all of this? I said, my voice carrying a strength I didn't know I possessed. I've been documenting Dorothy's behavior toward me for months. Not because I was planning some dramatic confrontation, but because I thought I was going crazy. I thought maybe I was imagining the slights, reading too much into innocent comments, being paranoid about seating arrangements and forgotten invitations. I pulled my phone out again, scrolling through what I now realized was months of evidence. I have photos of family gatherings where I was cropped out of pictures. I have text messages about events I was never invited to. I have recordings of conversations where my accomplishments were dismissed and my background was mocked. Dorothy's face was beginning to show real alarm. The careful control she had maintained all evening was cracking as she realized that her months of subtle torture hadn't gone unnoticed or undocumented. But the beautiful thing about tonight is that there's nothing subtle about it, I continued. Everyone in this room witnessed what just happened. There's no way to explain away a peanut butter sandwich and a wrapped cookie when everyone else got a 5-course gourmet meal. I turned to Marcus, who was looking increasingly panicked as he began to understand that this wasn't just a dinner argument that would blow over by next week. I want you to understand something, Marcus. I didn't grow up with money or private schools or country club memberships, but I grew up with dignity. I grew up understanding that you treat people with basic respect regardless of their background. I grew up believing that family means protecting each other, not feeding one member to the wolves for entertainment. Marcus tried to interrupt, but I held up my hand to stop him. I'm not finished. You sat here tonight and watched your mother systematically humiliate your wife, and not only did you say nothing, you enjoyed it. You laughed at jokes designed to exclude me. You participated in conversations that made me feel small and unwelcome. You chose their approval over my dignity, and you did it without a moment's hesitation. I could see him starting to panic, finally understanding that this wasn't going to end with me swallowing my hurt and pretending everything was fine. Zoe, please. Let's talk about this at home. We don't need to do this here. Actually, we do need to do this here, I replied firmly. Because this is where it happened. This is where your family showed me exactly what they think of me, and this is where you showed me exactly what kind of husband you are. I turned back to Dorothy, who was no longer even pretending to maintain her sweet facade. The mask had completely slipped, and I could see the cold calculation behind her actions. You spent months trying to make me disappear quietly, I told her. You hoped I would get tired of the constant disrespect and leave on my own, saving Marcus from having to choose between his family and his wife. You wanted me to be the problem, the one who couldn't adapt, the one who wasn't good enough. Dorothy's response revealed everything about her true character. You were never good enough for my son, and you never will be. Marcus deserves someone from a proper family, someone who understands our way of life, someone with breeding and class. The ugly truth was finally out in the open, no more pretense or polite manipulation. Just raw classism and snobbery laid bare for everyone to see. You're absolutely right, I said, and I could see confusion flicker across her face at my agreement. I'm not good enough for this family. I'm better than this family. I walked over to where my purse was hanging on my chair and picked it up, slinging it over my shoulder with deliberate calm. I grew up in foster care dreaming of having a real family someday. But this isn't family. This is a performance of superiority designed to make people feel small and excluded. This is a group of people so insecure about their own worth that they need to systematically destroy others to feel good about themselves. Marcus was on his feet now, panic evident in his voice. Zoe, wait. Let's go home and talk about this. We can work this out. I looked at him, this man I had loved and married, who had just demonstrated that his love came with conditions and limitations. There's nothing to work out, Marcus. You made your choice tonight. You chose them over me, just like you've been choosing them over me for 2 years. I reached into my purse and pulled out my wedding rings, the simple set we had chosen together when we were planning our modest wedding. They had meant everything to me, then symbols of love and commitment and belonging. Now they felt like shackles I had been wearing while pretending to be part of something that never wanted me. I walked over to where my wrapped cookie sat on its paper plate next to the plastic fork that had been my place setting for this anniversary celebration. I placed the rings carefully next to the cookie, the symbolism unmistakable. Keep these with the rest of your family's fake gestures, I said loud enough for everyone to hear. I won't be needing them anymore. The silence in the room was deafening. Dorothy was staring at the rings, clearly not having expected this level of consequences for her evening's entertainment. The other family members were looking anywhere but at me, suddenly uncomfortable with their role as spectators to what they were beginning to realize was the complete destruction of a marriage. Marcus made one last attempt to minimize what had happened. You're throwing away 2 years of marriage over dinner. This is insane, Zoe. You're being completely irrational. I turned to face him one final time, and I could feel the strength and clarity that comes when you finally stop making excuses for people who don't deserve them. I'm not throwing away our marriage over dinner, Marcus. I'm ending our marriage because tonight you showed me that you never really saw me as your equal, your partner, or even your family. I'm ending it because when it mattered most, when I needed you to stand up for me, you chose the comfort of belonging over the courage to do what was right. I walked toward the front door, my head held high while the Patterson family sat in stunned silence around their beautiful table with their perfect meal and their ugly hearts. As I reached the door, Dorothy's voice followed me, shrill and desperate, now that she realized her plan had backfired spectacularly. You'll never find anyone better than Marcus. You'll regret this for the rest of your life. I turned back one final time, looking at this woman who had spent months trying to destroy my sense of worth and belonging. The only thing I regret is wasting 2 years trying to earn love and respect from people who were never capable of giving either. And with that, I walked out of the Patterson house and out of their lives, forever leaving behind a family that had never been mine and a husband who had never truly been on my side. Walking out of that house was simultaneously the most terrifying and liberating moment of my adult life. I sat in my car in their circular driveway for several minutes, my hands shaking as the adrenaline from the confrontation began to wear off, and the reality of what I had just done started to sink in. I had just ended my marriage, walked away from the only family I had known as an adult, and I had absolutely nowhere to go. The first night was the hardest. I checked into a budget hotel near the airport, one of those generic places that rent rooms by the night to travelers and people in crisis. I sat on the polyester bedspread in a room that smelled like industrial cleaning supplies and finally allowed myself to cry. Not just for the marriage I had lost, but for the dream of belonging that had died with it. Marcus called 17 times that first night. I let every call go to voicemail, and when I finally listened to them the next morning, they followed a predictable pattern. The first few were angry, calling me dramatic and irrational, insisting I come home so we could talk like adults. The middle ones were bargaining, promising that things would change, that he would talk to his mother, that we could work through this together. The final few calls revealed what I had suspected all along. He never once acknowledged that what his family had done was wrong. He never apologized for his role in it. Instead, he kept circling back to how I had overreacted, how I had embarrassed him in front of his family, how I needed to be more understanding of his mother's old-fashioned ways. The next few weeks were a blur of practical necessities that felt surreal after the emotional intensity of that dinner. I found a small apartment across town, nothing fancy but clean and affordable, and most importantly, mine. I hired a lawyer, a no-nonsense woman who had seen plenty of marriages end over in-law problems, and who understood exactly what I was dealing with. Marcus fought the divorce initially not because he wanted to save our marriage, but because he couldn't accept that I was serious about leaving. He kept insisting that I was having some kind of breakdown, that I would come to my senses and realize I was throwing away a good life over a misunderstanding. But I wasn't having a breakdown. For the first time in 2 years, I was thinking clearly. I was seeing our relationship and his family's treatment of me without the fog of hope and denial that had clouded my judgment for so long. The more distance I got from that situation, the more I realized how much of myself I had lost trying to fit into their world. During the divorce proceedings, I learned some interesting things about the Patterson family dynamics that I hadn't been aware of while I was desperately trying to belong. It turned out that Dorothy's treatment of me wasn't unique. She had systematically driven away previous girlfriends, and even James's first wife who had divorced him after 3 years of similar treatment. Patricia, who I had thought was somewhat reasonable, actually reached out to me privately about a month after I left. She confessed that she had been planning her own escape from the family, and watching me stand up to Dorothy had given her the courage to start making her own plans. She apologized for her complicity in that dinner, and admitted that she had been so focused on not becoming Dorothy's target that she had participated in making me one instead. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Marcus had stopped fighting it after he realized that his family's social circle was starting to ask questions about why his wife had left so suddenly and dramatically. Having a woman walk out on a Patterson was not the kind of story Dorothy wanted circulating in their country club circles. In fact, I learned through mutual friends that Dorothy had been working overtime to control the narrative about our split. She was telling people that I had been unstable, that I had never fit in with their family, that Marcus was better off without me. But enough people had witnessed enough incidents over the years that her story wasn't landing the way she hoped it would. The healing process was slower and more complicated than I had expected. I had to relearn how to trust my own perceptions, how to recognize genuine kindness versus manipulation, how to believe that I deserved basic respect and dignity. I started therapy with a counselor who specialized in emotional abuse, and it was eye-opening to learn that what I had experienced had a name and a pattern. I also had to rebuild my sense of self-worth, which had been slowly eroded over 2 years of constant subtle criticism and exclusion. I had started to internalize Dorothy's messages about my background and my worthiness, and it took time and work to reject those voices and remember who I really was. But gradually, life got better. I reconnected with friends I had lost touch with during my marriage, people who reminded me of what genuine acceptance and support looked like. I focused on my career and discovered that without the constant stress of navigating hostile family dynamics, I had energy and creativity I had forgotten I possessed. About a year after the divorce, I started dating again. It was terrifying at first because I had lost confidence in my ability to judge people's character and intentions. But the first time a man I was seeing noticed that I seemed uncomfortable in a situation and immediately asked how he could help, I nearly cried. The contrast with Marcus's approach to my discomfort was so stark, it was almost shocking. The man I'm with now, David, has met his share of difficult people and understands what it means to stand up for someone you love. The first time we had dinner with his family and his mother made a comment that could have been taken as dismissive, he immediately and gently corrected her. Not in a dramatic way, but in a clear, firm way that established that disrespecting me wasn't acceptable to him. That night I realized what I had been missing for 2 years. I had been so focused on trying to earn Dorothy's acceptance that I had failed to notice that Marcus never really defended me, never established boundaries, never made it clear that treating his wife poorly wasn't acceptable to him. Looking back now, I can see that the dinner from hell wasn't really about a peanut butter sandwich or a wrapped cookie. It was about respect, dignity, and what it means to truly have someone's back when it matters. Dorothy's elaborate humiliation was certainly cruel and calculated, but Marcus's silent participation was the real betrayal. I learned that sometimes the family you're born into or marry into isn't your real family. Real family doesn't humiliate you to prove a point or test your loyalty. Real family doesn't make you earn basic respect through years of patient submission to abuse. Real family protects and defends each other, especially when one member is being targeted by someone with more power or status. That peanut butter sandwich taught me more about self-worth than any expensive meal ever could. It taught me that no relationship, no matter how much you've invested in it, is worth sacrificing your dignity. It taught me that sometimes walking away from what looks like everything is the only way to find what's actually worth having. The most important lesson I learned is that you can't love someone into loving you the way you deserve to be loved. You can't patience and kindness your way into acceptance from people who have decided you're not worthy of it. And you can't build a real partnership with someone who will throw you under the bus to keep the peace with people who mistreat you. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is discovering who people really are when it matters most. That anniversary dinner was horrible, but it gave me information I needed to make the right decision for my life. It showed me exactly what my future would look like if I stayed in that marriage, and it gave me the clarity and courage to choose something better. I'm grateful now for that night, as painful as it was. It ended one chapter of my life and started a much better one. And sometimes, when I'm having dinner with people who actually care about me, people who would never dream of treating anyone the way I was treated that night, I think about that wrapped cookie and smile, because it represents the moment I finally learned to value myself enough to demand better. If you've ever been in a situation where someone was systematically trying to make you feel small or unwelcome, I want you to know that it's not about you. It's about them and their own insecurities and need to feel superior to someone else. And if you have people in your life who claim to love you but won't stand up for you when it matters, it might be time to ask yourself whether that's really love at all. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to stand up to someone who was trying to humiliate you in front of others? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding your strength and standing up for yourself. Share this with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve better than being someone's target for entertainment. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that you are worthy of respect, kindness, and genuine love regardless of where you come from or what anyone else might think about your background. Sometimes the best families are the ones you choose for yourself.